Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm returning to the theme of romance fraud. Not just because it's a fascinating glimpse into one of the fastest growing forms of fraud, but also because it reveals a lot about the risks we all face in a world of AI-generated deepfakes. If you listen to my previous episode with Anna Rowe, the victim of a romance fraud, there's a link to that in the show notes, you'll know how emotionally devastating romance fraud can be. Which is why the approach to the topic adopted by my guest on this episode, Becky Holmes, is both surprising and refreshing. As you'll hear, Becky wasn't the victim of a romance fraud, and she didn't start out to research the topic she's become an expert in. During the pandemic, she found herself being approached by scammers, and rather than ignoring them, she started to play a game, sending them absurd messages, inventing increasingly ridiculous backstories, and seeing how far she could push their script before it broke. And what began as a joke, something to pass the time and wind people up, turned into a deep, uncomfortable education in how romance fraud actually works. Not as a technical scam, but as a psychological one. What followed was her best-selling book, Keanu Reeves Is Not in Love with You. In our discussion, we talk about why laughing at scammers is not the same as blaming victims, about the striking parallels between romance fraud and abusive relationships, and about shame, isolation, gaslighting, and why believing you're too smart to fall for one is often the most dangerous belief of all. We explore humour, not as a distraction, but a way of getting people to pay attention to something they'd otherwise rather not think about. As you'll hear, this was a thoroughly enjoyable episode to record, but also touched on a really serious topic. It's my conversation with Becky Holmes on romance fraud. Becky, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Well, thank you very much. You went from laughing then to very serious very suddenly. I'm impressed.
Well, I like to keep the laughter for the green room and later in the show, but I like to try and start things off on a civilized basis. Of all the episodes I've ever recorded, I genuinely have no idea where this one's going to go, and that's part of the joy of it. So to start us off, I first came across you because you wrote a fabulous book, which was all about scams. And then I met you, and you were exactly the same person. You were the human form of the book. So to give people a sense of what the book is about, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Oh, gosh. So I suppose I wind people up for financial gain, I guess, in that I wind people up and it resulted in a book. Although actually financial gain is questionable because the publisher went into administration, but that's a whole other story. So it turns out maybe I'll just wind people up for free. But basically, when I joined Twitter, I had loads of really handsome soldiers messaging me and telling me that they loved me, like immediately. Now, we're going back sort of 5 years. So at the time I was in my early 40s, and these men were like 21, 22, really sort of buff, ridiculously handsome. And they were like, "You're my perfect woman." And I thought, I don't think I am. But do you know what? I always say, if just one buff soldier had messaged me, this could be a whole different conversation, because I'm exactly the sort of person that would get involved in scam, because I always sort of feel this need to help people. So if one buff soldier had said, I'm having a real problem, I can't get to my bank, I need 100 quid, I would think, oh, all right, then I'll help him. Will you pay me back? Yes. Oh, okay, I believe you. But because it was loads of them, it was like 12, I thought, no, there's something going wrong here. So after a while, I just thought I might try and see what I can get away with. So I started sending them absolutely ridiculous messages back. And they weren't reading them. They were just kind of like going on with their script. And I thought, God, this is amazing. I can literally say whatever I want. I can be like a 13-year-old again with a really ridiculous sense of humour. And it became this thing, and it became my hobby during lockdown, and now it's become my job.
And so just to give people a sense, and what's great about the book is you put actual sort of screenshots effectively of what, and the conversations are, you're suggesting things like that you've just murdered someone and that you've got a dead body sitting in your fridge, that kind of thing. It's not sort of slightly subtle.
Yeah,
It's
it's
blatantly ridiculous,
as
and
blatant and with photos sometimes. So one of my favourite ones is I got my best friend to come round and lie on the kitchen floor. And I squirted some ketchup on him and put this knife next to him. And it was this Brad Pitt impersonator. And I said, I don't know what to do. I've just murdered this tumble dryer repairman. And I sent him this picture. And he said, oh no, why did you do that? Not like, oh my God, you're a psychopath. Just, oh no. And I said he didn't have the part that I needed. And this guy, who, I mean, kudos to him, he thought, right, there's an opportunity here. So he said to me, don't worry. I know General Mark Milley, I think his name was, who was, don't know if he still is, like really high up in the US Army, like basically controlled the whole thing. And he said, don't worry, I know him and I'll get him to sort it for you. So then I had this other message from somebody, obviously the same guy, pretending to be Mark Milley, saying, don't worry, for 30,000 euros, I can come and clear that dead body. So, you know, this is one scammer who did read what I had to say, but thought, hang on,
there's an opportunity here.
there's an opportunity here. Fantastic. And that conversation really surprised me. I was like, this is absolutely insane, but amazing because it gave me so much material.
So what I find fascinating about it is there's an exercise in fun here, right? Which is you're just pushing these things to almost like surreal lengths. But the purpose of the book and a lot of the things you do is it's not just to poke fun at these things, right? It's actually to highlight this dynamic. And you're not mocking people that fall for these things. You're highlighting these things as, I mean, there's an important point to it, right? Which is this stuff is going on. It is ridiculous, but let's shine a light on it.
Yeah. So the book starts off very much, actually, it's kind of my journey through the world of romance fraud. So it starts off with me sort of taking the mickey out of these fraudsters. But then as it goes on, I start to meet victims of romance fraud and learn their stories and how, God, the impact, the emotion, I mean, forget the financial impact just for a minute, that the emotional impact on these people. They send all of this money in good faith. Then they realize that not only have they had that money stolen, but also this person who they believe they were in love with never existed. So they're having their money stolen, but also the idea of their future. And it's a hideous thing. So the book starts off kind of lighthearted, but I interview victims of romance fraud and also then kind of get a bit more journalistic about it and look at where the scammers are from, how they operate. So, you know, I've got kind of scripts that scammers use in the book, and then kind of what, as a society, we're doing wrong and what we should be doing better. And a lot of that comes down to victim blaming. When you see interviews from romance fraudsters in national press, for example, the comments underneath are like, oh, well, you know, she's pushing 50 and she's fat. What did she expect? It's unbelievable, the kind of vitriol that victims come across and how many people make fun of them. It's horrific. And then we sort of wonder why nobody reports it. Well, of course they don't report it. You know, I've heard awful things that police people have said to victims of romance fraud. So why would you? Why would you report it? So what started off as lighthearted and me kind of finding a way to amuse myself during lockdown now has become what I do. So, you know, I've got a second book coming out about the future of fraud. But I also now go around and give talks at conferences. I sort of speak to the police quite regularly about romance fraud, just about what happens and how we should be doing better.
I find this fascinating because normally it's normally the other way around, right? It's normally you got a serious topic and then we'll sort of bring the comedy to play. You started out from the comedic angle and then have gone all serious on us. And I think it's a really interesting gateway how sort of, you know, pissing around during lockdown has created this niche for you where you're now an expert in it's a very flippant entry point, right? It's a very sort of literally basic entry point that's taking you into this really very serious analysis and that level of expertise. And I think that's absolutely fascinating because it's normally, as I say, the other way around.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that I get asked to speak at conferences is because I do start off with some of the funny stuff. Because what I have learned is that if you use humour, people sit up and take notice and then are more likely to carry on listening when you talk about the serious bits. Because I have always been like that. I respond to humour just incredibly. Whenever I felt down, I've been through terrible periods of mental health. I spent time in a psych unit. It's always laughter that I fall back on. And in my daily life, I laugh all the time. I mean, you could say, no wonder she spent time in a psych unit. But, it's my coping mechanism. If something really awful happens, I have to shake my head and laugh and just think, oh, yeah, of course that's happened. But it helps. And I think when you're talking about subjects like this, because nobody is lighthearted, you need something so that people don't switch off. I've been at conferences where I've watched other people talk and people in the audience are just on their phones. So, and I always look at the person on stage and think, oh God, can you see people on their phones? Because that must be so demotivating. Um, yeah, so I think humour is a really good way of getting through to people.
Talk a bit about bridging the gap, because the humour works because the situations are ridiculous. And so in many respects, what you're doing is unpicking it and going, there are a lot of absurd scripts out there, people who aren't really paying attention, and you're mocking them slightly. But we then flip into respect for people that have fallen victim to this stuff. How do you square
Absolutely.
those? How do you square those two things?
Do you know, uh, if I'm honest with you, I don't know how I've done it. I've had nothing but praise about the book from victims who've said, I've really appreciated what you've done and I haven't felt belittled, because never once have I ever said a victim is stupid or foolish or naive or gullible. So I think it's about making sure that when you're being lighthearted, it's at the expense of the fraudster. And I think it's the humor is simply a way. So I always start off, it's a very kind of blunt transition when I present. I always say, look, I'm going to get serious about romance fraud, but I'm going to start off with my favorite interaction. And I talk about this one in particular where I told a guy that I was going over to his oil rig and he sort of panicked. It's one of my absolute favorites. Yeah. So I talk about that and people kind of get engaged. And then I do flip very suddenly and say, look, now it's time to get serious. And I think people respond to that because they think, okay, we've had this bit of a, kind of a break in the seriousness. And now she's going to say what she came here for. So I'm not even sure that I've bridged it. I think it's more like a sort of pogo stick where I've just like gone from sort of one cliff of humor. There's no bridge. I've just sort of pogo sticked across the cavern and kind of got into the serious bit. I've just found a very powerful pogo stick.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm on about now.
But I think it's. Don't worry, it's banging on for the show. But the bit that fascinates me about that is that if you were to sort of look at this formulaically, there's a really it's a challenging tightrope to walk, as you've identified, or pogo stick to stay on, or whatever, right? So it's not easy. And I think the reason you managed to do it is because all of this is authentically you. So at no point are you sure you're putting on a persona. I would hope. Who knows? You're putting on a persona when you talk about murdering
My
your pair.
freeze is fun of heads.
Yeah, right. But all of this is you bringing your humour to it, and as is your natural curiosity in the sort of the investigative journalist end of the spectrum. So it seems to me this works because you're being you, and therefore you're not. No point during any of this, right? It's perfectly consistent for you as an individual to think this is a hilarious situation that's worth mocking, but also recognizing there's an underlying dynamic that's very, very serious. All of that sits with who you are. And it just seems to me that the reason I don't want to say get away with it, but I will, right? The reason you get away with it is because it's you being you.
Yeah, I think so. For anybody listening to this who hasn't read the book, which will be everyone, if you do read the book, it will
when you read the book.
You read the book, when you read this outstanding piece of literature worthy of awards, if you've listened to this, you'll realise that I write like I speak. So it's a bit sweary. There's lots of ridiculous analogies in it. And I think that made it easy for me to write because like you say, I could write as myself. The second book I wrote was a little bit harder because I had to fit in, it's part of a series, and I had to fit in with quite sort of stringent guidelines. And I found that a lot more of a challenge because I couldn't be sweary, I couldn't be silly. There's humour in it, but I mean, I'm still myself. It's still not written academically. It's still written with, you know, analogies and metaphors and all that. But I think there is something about writing in your own voice, which for me, I enjoy reading books like that. I like it when I read a book and I can kind of visualize the person and I can imagine what they're like to have a pint with. You know, I like that.
And so when you're under constraints for writing things, how do you handle that? Because you are like, you're unashamedly you, and I love it. This is just so compelling from my perspective because it's just nice to meet people that are genuine and themselves. You know, there's no sort of attempt to be anything other than what you are. How do you cope when you're slightly constrained for that? Because I think that it's almost like the power of what you do comes from you being you, right? In other words, you've written a book that nobody else could write. And I'm fascinated by how do you then take that into a world where you're having to be more kind of constrained by someone else's formats?
Yeah. So I've written a few times for the Times now about fraud. And as you can imagine, it has to be rather a different style. But again, I've been lucky in that they kind of liked the fact that I'm slightly more informal. I can't get away with using humor and screenshots and that kind of thing, but I can. What I've found is that I can deal with constraints as long as I can maintain a kind of conversational style. So even when I've written for the Times, I've been I guess not informal, but conversational. If I was talking to, let's say, a head of a bank, right? And I didn't want to use the F word and on all that kind of stuff. I've written as I might speak to them. Do you know what? Having said that, I have met lots of heads of banks and I've been absolutely awful. So scratch that.
I don't think there's anyone running a bank that won't have heard that sort of language in the workplace.
No, no. And actually, do you know what I've realised? So people in the counter fraud world, I sort of thought that they'd all be, you know, really kind of boring. And when you go to a conference, everybody looks quite similar. You know, all the men are sort of, you know, kind of business casual.
There's a
and all
kind
the
of
rest of it.
uniform.
There is,
Right.
which I don't really fit into. You know, I've got a lot of tattoos. I've got pink hair. I'm, you know, sort of slightly different. But I've noticed that there's a lot of really funny people in that industry who you just wouldn't expect. There's been a couple of people, I've looked at their LinkedIn profiles before I've met them, and I thought, God, this is going to be a boring conversation. And they're absolutely hilarious. So there's this really interesting two sides of things. And I've met academics and I've read their papers and thought, how am I going to speak to you? You're ridiculously clever. And I've met them and they've been just so funny. And we've kind of clicked over humour. Yeah, I've forgotten your question, but
Well, I'm not sure there was one, but don't worry. But it's the bit that I find intriguing is that I sort of have a sense that if people were allowed to be like you, I don't mean literally like you, but have the freedoms that you have, I think they would love that. And so one of the things I think is really fascinating is we look at sort of corporate constructs and the way of certain publications, there are expected norms, probably for good reason, but sometimes I think it's worth questioning. And I think there's something about the way you do things that everybody wants to be a bit like that, right? They'd love to have those freedoms and do those things. And so in a way, people bring as much as that as they feel they can in their particular environment. And so I think there's loads of people there who naturally have gifts and skills and can entertain us that are just never allowed to do that. And frankly, long may that continue, right? Because I don't want more competition like some us. But I think there's something interesting there about we don't expect it. It's there, but people aren't allowed to. And what you've managed to do is carved a career that allows you just to be unashamedly you, bring what you do really well to the fore. And I sometimes wonder whether this isn't a really an interesting perspective that says how much are corporate jobs not allowing people to do that, right? And is that a good thing or not? I'm not sure I want my air traffic controller or my brain surgeon to be perpetually giggling or laughing as they do. Look at that! I've got all the dots in one space, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure we want that in that particular dynamic, but I wonder whether it's not being spread. And so I think there's an interesting thing about you bringing out those bits in people. So they probably can be very, very serious, but you kind of in showing up in the way that you do, give them permission to do that. And I think there's something interesting about what the traditional jobs do to people, and is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, and I used to be in the corporate world. So many years ago, I ran one of the press offices for AXA. So big job, direct reports, dealing with kind of crisis comms and all the rest of it.
So serious stuff, right?
Very serious stuff. Yeah. And, financial services, oh God, it was like high net worth investments and pensions. I mean, I'm struggling to think of a more boring subject. Particularly for somebody like me who's not high net worth and never will ever be. And I did that with, I think, humour and creativity. So when I used to organise press trips, for example, they were always a little bit different. But I definitely misjudged it at times. So I was quite, I suppose, proud of not fitting the AXA mould, but I misjudged it in that I was probably came across as not taking things seriously enough. I was lucky in that the CEO had a really good sense of humour and we sort of got each other. But a lot of the more senior staff were, very sort of sensible and saw me as, I suppose, just a ridiculous girl at that point, kind of early 30s. So now doing what I do, I have that in mind. And I have all of that PR training and kind of, teaching other people to speak to the media. I have it in mind what's appropriate and what's not, and who I can get away with it with.
So you know where the line is because, interestingly, because you've previously crossed it.
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing is that now that I'm self-employed, I literally have no one to answer to. So I have no doubt that when I go to conferences and speak to people now, I cross a line in terms of, I might drop a swear word or say something inappropriate about somebody or something. But that doesn't bother me because that almost goes with my brand.
Right.
I don't know how to describe it. I've learned to sort of be as inappropriate as I can get away with. Does that make sense?
I think that's really interesting because I think if you were to constrain yourself too much, you wouldn't be delivering full value. And also it would feel weird, right? But I think people would notice it. So you have to show up as authentic, not performatively rude, not performatively offensive,
Absolutely not.
You're just delivering an authentic version of you. And I totally get that because I have all these sort of thoughts, and one can overthink this sort of thing about like, how do I want to show up for this thing? What should I wear? All that kind of stuff. And then I just got to a point where actually there are going to be some people that are going to be annoyed come what may.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's no point in trying to cater to that. And they might performatively be offended by things as well. But it is a thought process that one has to go through when you are showing up as yourself. And it's that absence of rules I think is really interesting because you decide who you want to be. And to a certain extent, people know that. It's not, you're not subtle about this. It's not like you suddenly show, oh, wasn't expecting that because you've written a book. There's been that stuff. Right? And anybody hiring you will have seen something that you have done. And that's the reason that they've hired you. But I struggle with all these things the whole time. It's like, where's the balancing act? Where's the adult telling what I should or should?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know the weirdest thing is, I never get nervous presenting. I love presenting. Oh, I love being on stage and doing the stuff, and I absolutely love it. I never stand at the sidelines thinking, oh God, I'm on in 10 minutes. I can't wait to get on there. But do you know what I worry about? I worry about what I'm going to wear. And it's like the smallest thing, but because I don't live in corporate world anymore. I don't own loads of corporate stuff. I mean, at the moment, I've got like a hoodie on and I've got my pajama bottoms on and some massive slippers. And my natural dress sense wouldn't be what was expected. So that's kind of the thing that I think about before I leave the house. Now, so far, I don't think I've got it wrong. I've kind of done the like business casual, but maybe a little bit unexpected. There is this thing in my head that still says people are going to judge you. Now, like I said before, I've got tattoos and pink hair. People are going to judge me anyway. So why am I bothered if my dress has got a stripe on it rather than a spot? But I think it's this thing that I've kept from corporate life. It's like the thing that I can't let go of. Because if you get on a stage and you're dressed in a suit, let's say, and everybody else is in jeans and a t-shirt, I would feel like a wally. Whereas no one else would probably really care, but I would stand up there doing my thing thinking, I'm overdressed here. I need to take something off. And then, before I know it, I've just got my pants on. I would like to just caveat that by saying that's never happened.
Could do, though, right? Never rule it out.
It could do, yeah. If I sort of spiral downhill, who knows what might happen. Yeah, there is still this weird thing that I feel this massive amount of freedom in my job, but there are very small things that I still hang on to.
So this intrigues me because I have, in some of my social media videos, I wear hats, right? Because somebody once said to me, you have a like a prop, right? Wear a hat because you do explainer videos. And so I went to a fabulous old school hat maker that I'd come across. And I've now got this addiction to buying hats. So I buy them for the purpose of social media. And so somebody said to me jokingly the other day, they were like, are you going to show up in a hat to do the presentation? And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Because I'd always seen them as they were on camera props, not the in-person props.
Oh.
And then I just went, well, I could. And then I got into the space that you're in of like, well, is that appropriate? What would people say? Is that okay? And I'm like, you're perfectly willing to wear them on video, right? Why wouldn't you like it? And then and where I got to was it actually became a logistical thing. I'm like, some of these hats don't travel. Well, you can't just wear them because if they get wet or whatever, right? So I was just like, I can't be bothered, right? So then I try and solve the logistical problem. And I thought, I've got to do this. And I've started to do it. Feels a little bit naughty and inappropriate, but I'm like, we want to make an impression. And sure, I'm not reliant on if the prop was the only thing going, right? Who's the idiot wearing the hat? But I just thought, well, why not do this? But it's the hang-ups. There are weird hang-ups to this whole thing that shouldn't, in theory, exist. And I'm spending a lot of my time trying to work out where the limits of things like shame and embarrassment and appropriateness lie. And what I love about you is that you're experimenting in different bits of it. And I think there is no right or wrong answer here, but I think it's just really, really interesting that in theory, we're unleashed and we can do what the hell we like. And that's true. But equally, it's sort of like there are other constraints, some of which may be sensible, some of which may not. And I think it's really interesting that you go through these mental gymnastics, because if I looked at you, I would go, here is someone that's fully in control of their voice, right? That's unashamedly themselves. And yet, even when we start to unpick it, it's like, well, it's a bit more complicated than that. And actually,
I tell you what else I find interesting. So when I've written for the Times, every time they've wanted to do a photo shoot, right? So I go along and you have your hair and your makeup done by people they bring in. They bring in a photographer. Wardrobe comes down with this kind of rack of clothes for you to choose from. But I never, ever, ever am allowed to look like myself. And it's because obviously the Times has this very the Times magazine has this very particular view on how they want people to look. So
sort of house style almost for dressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also for posing. So you're not allowed to smile, which for me is really odd. And to be honest, I've got a horrible resting bitch face. So when I'm not allowed to smile, I look either terrifying, miserable, or vacant. So there I am in front of the camera with kind of hair that I wouldn't normally have, makeup which I wouldn't wear, grimacing at a photographer. And then the piece comes out and it's written well, if I say so myself. But my friends are like,
who's that?
Who is this? What on earth do you look like? What are you doing? And I have to say, they tell me what to do. Now, I get it because obviously, like you say, they've got a house style. But I've always found it interesting that there is a house style to any publication. You have to, it's not just the Times. If I was to go and do a photo shoot for, I don't know, Woman magazine or whatever, they would still do you in a particular way that's for their readership. So I find that really interesting because I sort of think that I think their view is that if I looked like I do naturally, their readership wouldn't take me seriously. Maybe I'm overthinking that, but
or they've just never thought to ask the question, and it's just sort of like it's just the way they've done things, and it's just sort of been handed down. And actually, I'm not suggesting you do this, right? Because you want to keep writing for them, but like maybe if you were to turn around and go, I will not wear that, right? And I demand
oh my God, can you imagine? And I start asking for a rider for the dressing room. I'm like, right, I only want green Skittles and 3 flumps in sizes left to right. I'd be a right diva. And also, if I said I'm only going to wear the following, it would be like, I'm only going to wear the following. I want a hoodie, a Nirvana t-shirt. I don't think they'd ever allow me to be fully myself.
But I mean, this points to, you can only sustain your work by being you ultimately, right? And I mean that in terms of the curiosity, the passion, and all of those things. So all of these things you're talking about are sort of you could look at it positively and say they're creative constraints on you that might be helpful, or you could look at it and say that's impeding you from being the real version of you. And it's an interesting balancing act because it really seems to me the force of nature that you are just comes from the fact that you're comfortable in your own skin. So when somebody presents you with an opportunity or sort of you feel like you're being pushed, that could be slightly debilitating. And I love the fact that you're navigating this with aplomb when you're sort of going, well, that's just the way it is. And accepting compromises on the way is part of, I guess, getting you to where you want to get to.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, again, I've learnt maybe when I was doing the PR stuff and I was kind of a bit too big for my boots, maybe I wouldn't have been like this. But for me, I sort of think, look, I'm getting to write for the Times and I'm having my hair and makeup done and spending a day in a studio. It's like dress up, isn't it? I can play that character. I can be whatever you want me to be. Who said that?
I'm thinking of Titanic, actually. I
haven't even seen
French
that.
Girls or something, but no.
Oh yeah. I've seen that clip. No, I wasn't like Kate Winslet in that scene. That's a very, very different sort of photo shoot.
Talk a little bit about. So we've done the fun part. Let's flip a little bit on the serious side. You've developed a level of expertise in the subject, driven by a passion to do something about this stuff, right? So you're highlighting it, but you're clearly. I don't know. Are you a campaigner? Would you say?
I've been called a campaigner, but I don't know if that's accurate or not. I'm not quite sure what the definition of a campaigner is. I mean, I don't go out with a placard and that kind of stuff. I'm not sure. I suppose a victim advocate, maybe. I don't know. I suppose if somebody said, do you campaign for more victim support or whatever, then I would say yes. But I don't know if I could back that up because I don't necessarily kind of go out and do you know what, Christian? I'm not sure. Maybe I am a campaigner because I talk publicly about it.
I mean, there's no requirement to have a label. I'm just sort of intrigued as to sort of how you would position it, because I love the fact that you're questioning it, going, well, is that right? And part of it, you're sort of saying, I don't have the evidence to support that status. But then part of it, you're just going, I don't know if I want to be that person, right? I don't know if I want to be defined by that. And I think there's something quite nice about what you're doing in many respects, which is not sitting in that traditional thing. And this is not a criticism here. People, there are all sorts of ways to affect change. What I think is interesting is you found your own way, which is that I think you are not campaigning in a traditional sense and not doing some of the things that one is, quote unquote, supposed to do. But you're having an impact. And so, again, this is doing it on your terms. So the fact that you can't define it, I think is probably it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I've been on TV, they have like the little caption at the bottom.
Yeah. Okay, what do they put?
Well, do you know what? Once, and this was local ITV, I think, they put Lord Hanson of Lord Hanson of Flint, who's the new Minister for Fraud. And when it came on and I watched it back, I thought, really? Has nobody picked up that I'm not a man in his late 50s, early 60s? Please. So I've been him. I've been a campaigner. I've been a fraud supporter. I think somebody got that a bit wrong. And a fraud campaigner. Somebody just speaks about fraud. Very lazy.
That's really unhelpful. Sorry, I'm not clear to me. Is she going to tell me how to do this, or is she?
Yeah, and so many people have just put victim. Not questioning.
Oh, just generic victim.
Right? That's probably the most accurate. I've been a victim of so many things, so maybe I should request that in the future. Just victim, Becky Holmes, victim. But it's interesting how people label you without knowing. Do you know what else is interesting? So I get a lot of calls from the media saying,
I presume like there's some scam story. Oh, who can we get? Right. And you're out there.
Yeah. Actually, in fact, not just that. It's when people are looking for a story, they'll kind of ring up and say, have you got anything? And so many people ring up and they say, we'd like to interview you. And I'm like, yeah, fine. And when they figure out that I'm not actually a victim of romance fraud myself, they lose all interest.
Because you're not the sob story. You're.
Yeah. And now, when journalists ring up and they say, do you have any victims we can speak to? I say, no, it's not. This isn't like a Victorian, freak show where you just wheel somebody out for people to take the piss out of. So I always say no, because I don't trust them to handle it in the right way. And I don't want to be a part of that. But again, there's this thing where people only want to speak to people with certain labels. And it doesn't matter whether you're an expert or not. They just want somebody to write about, to poke fun at.
And your angle, I guess it's a disruptive angle, right? Which is the toy and expose the underlying dynamics.
Yeah. And this is the thing. People or journalists, it seems, the majority of, I will say, don't seem to be interested in the story behind it. They're interested in speaking to victims and what happened to them. Now, that's fine. And we all need to know about these stories because it will kind of give people, the courage to come forward to be another one to start with. Romance fraud is so much more than just wheeling out a victim to speak to. There is so much interesting stuff behind the scenes, like these scripts that they work from. I mean, AI, that is huge now, and that's only going to get bigger. It used to be that you could say to somebody who you suspected was the victim of romance fraud, you could say, look, if they won't video call you, this is a massive red flag. But now, of course, scammers can video call you using somebody else's voice, image. There should be more done on that. There should be more done on. One of the things that I talk about in the book, and nobody ever wants to talk about this, I think because it's potentially sensitive, is some of the practices that go on behind the scenes where some of the frauds originate from. So with romance fraud, there are kind of three main areas of the world that they come from, and that's Ghana, Nigeria, and Southeast Asia. Now, Southeast Asia, we call pig butchering scams, and they're where the scammers have actually been trafficked themselves and they're forced to scam, which is just horrendous. The ones on the west coast of Africa are very, very interesting because of some of the voodoo that takes place behind the scenes. So you hear of these incredibly strange practices that the scammers will go through to make them a better scammer. And for me, that's fascinating. But people don't want to talk about it because I think there's a risk of it maybe coming across as having a racial slur attached to it, whereas it isn't. It's just really interesting. So people people are very constrained about what they feel they will talk about with this subject. And I don't think it then does the subject justice, because it is so much more than most people see.
I think that's really so. I guess the simple journalistic thing is I just want the headline of ideally they've lost a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely.
And had awful things happen and all that kind of stuff, and then that's my story. Whereas you're interested, I guess this must come from your curiosity, right? You're interested in the plumbing, like what's going on behind the backstage, right? What's going on behind the scenes? And I agree that I think it's fascinating because I think it's ultimate, and AI is, of course, as you say, shifting this thing. But ultimately, even with AI, there's a human behind this.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly.
There are some motivations, and the reason I think this subject is really important is even if you're not in the business of romance scams applying to you, right? Because you're in a relationship or whatever. The same techniques can be used in other contexts. And so I think having an awareness of the sorts of things that happen, the way these tricks, because it's a con trick, right? The way these tricks work, I think is useful because you can see it in loads of other contexts, right? There's financial scams that aren't romance scams. You see it on people trying to take over your email, take over your LinkedIn account, whatever it happens to be. And that's why I don't understand the reactions. Well, even if you sort of go, I would never fall for that. And one of the things I'm realizing in life is that actually never say that.
Absolutely.
It's just one, you're hostage to fortune, but two, it just relies on some sense of I'm very sophisticated. So I have fallen for stuff in the past. I have almost clicked things and probably clicked things and been saved by security software or whatever. Absolutely, right? And so I totally see that as with other unethical things, right? I could easily cross a line without realizing. So I think this is really fascinating, and I find it really intriguing because for me, the reason I read your stuff with interest and listen to what you have to say is I'm not in the market for I don't need a relationship because I have a partner, but it's about the other lessons we can learn from it. And I think if we want to make people savvy about this stuff, then what you're doing is a really interesting gateway to that. And the lesson isn't just about romance. That's just one context. It's a particularly strong pull, I guess. It's a very effective way of doing it, but there's other levers people can pull.
Well, one of the things that I talked about it in the book, but I talk about it for quite a long time when I do presentations, is this parallel between romance fraud and domestic abuse. And whenever I come off stage, aside from people saying that initial bit was very funny, the thing that people want to talk about is this domestic abuse parallel. So I was in an abusive relationship years ago. And when I went round and started meeting victims of romance fraud, and they were telling me kind of how the fraudster had got them to do certain things or to stay quiet about certain things, I was thinking, oh my God. So I was thinking, this is what I went through. So first of all, there's kind of isolating people from family and friends. So obviously, if you're being abused, the abuser wants to keep you away from other people so that you're not persuaded to leave. Well, it's exactly the same with romance fraud. They don't want you talking to people and telling somebody that you're sending money because somebody outside of the relationship is going to say, hang on a minute, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So they don't want that. There's also the gaslighting. So when I was in one of two, I would say, sort of controlling relationships, I was, did I say that? Did I promise that? Oh God. And then you end up sort of apologizing for things that you've never done. And I mentioned briefly before about being in a psych unit, and it wasn't a joke. The gaslighting and all of this actually pushed me that far. And romance fraud victims, to a greater or lesser extent, experience the same thing. So they're thinking, God, did I promise you money? I'm so sorry. I can't remember. And, I'm so sorry if I said that. And, I didn't mean to be insensitive. And I understand that you're in a difficult position. And they end up doing more than they ever would in terms of finding money because they think they promised it. They've been kind of, I don't like the word tricked, but they've been tricked into doing it. There's also the shame that goes with it. You don't want people to know. You don't want to report it. And there's many other things which I won't go into, but these parallels are really, really important in terms of the psychological effect, but how people get embroiled in these relationships in the first place, why they stay in them. That's really interesting. and why they sometimes go back to them, and why they sometimes, romance fraud, there's a reasonably high rate of people falling straight into another one. And that's really interesting in itself.
Yeah, because you can see how victim shaming kicks in there, because you go, wow, I mean, get fooled once, fine, but second time, wow,
Yeah.
that's just negligent.
But this is it. If you think about it, say you've been, and it's the same again with abusive relationships. You're used to a certain thing, then you meet somebody who promises to be the opposite to everything. So you are pulled in by them because they are suddenly your savior from what was previously a horrible relationship. And it doesn't take long for that person to then start chipping away and becoming the same thing. Because if you're out of an abusive relationship or a fraudulent relationship, you are vulnerable to some extent or another. Even if you're the strongest man or woman in the world, you're still vulnerable. And abusers and fraudsters prey on that. Not just vulnerable people, but they see somebody and they think, hello. This is why I say to people, if you're on a dating site, never say that you're a widower, because that is prime for fraudsters, because they think, one, lonely, even though you might not be, two, money. So people look for these potential vulnerabilities.
One of the things here is that we're not very smart and savvy about this stuff, right? And the level of sophistication on the other side is just increasing. So this points to me towards we absolutely need systems in place to protect people, right? And that's on the platforms and everything else. But we also it seems to me there's a sort of level of literacy, might be the wrong word, but sort of literacy and awareness that's really, really important here. Not that that's going to solve everything, but that might help. And it seems to me a key part of what you do, particularly with the funny stories, is getting people's attention on this topic.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned literacy because the new book is called The Future of Fraud. I've had to look into what's going to be happening over the next few years, decades. And one thing I've said is they need to introduce fraud literacy into schools. So how to spot these, what the red flags are, how to speak to people who they believe might be involved in a fraud. I think it's really, really important. You can bring out as many victims as you like and they can talk about their very moving stories. But there are always going to be a massive ton of people who, like you said, think, oh, well, that wouldn't get me. I'm too clever. So what we need, and again, as you say, is all the systems in place, which Meta, for example, are awful. There's no systems in place to protect people on their platforms. So we need all of that, but we need humans to be talking in non-judgmental language. And, I'm not keen on the term education because it sounds patronizing, but there needs to be stuff done where, there's a guy called Paul Maskell, works for UK Finance. And he said to me once, fraud isn't a problem until it is. So people don't seek out literature about fraud until they've been defrauded. So we need to change that. And one of the things I've had about the Keanu Reeves book is so many people have said to me, I gave this book to a friend or a relative who I thought was perhaps in a bad relationship, and they read it and left the relationship. And we need more things like that people read, people watch, and they can relate to, but they haven't had to seek out. And I really do believe that. I think people take more on board when they don't realize that they're learning.
Right. So you are kind of again, not quite the right. So it's a gateway drug, right? To learning about this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I like the idea of a gateway drug. What would that make me? Marijuana?
Right.
Would that make me the marijuana of the fraud world?
Do you want to be the alcohol of it? And this is an interesting thing, right? There is something about making this stuff accessible and not patronizing. And this is, I think, it's awkward to talk about and challenging. And yet this is just a major thing. And as you say, it's not going to get any better. The thing's not going to go away. It's going to get more sophisticated, more challenging. Yeah. And I think that's where your approach, I think, is super helpful because the comedy, I think, does disarm people. It's like, who doesn't want to have a laugh? Well, there are some people that don't want to have a laugh, but the vast majority of people want to be entertained on some level. And that's where that's a really powerful tool.
They do. And I think probably what helps, well, what I've been told what helps is that I do share personal stories as well. I have no problem in talking about mental illness that I've suffered with and how, relationships and stuff have added to that. Also, the fact that I'm a ex-gambling addict and the parallels that I see between that and romance fraud as well. So I have no problem kind of opening up and using personal experiences, which aren't what you would normally hear about in a fraud conversation, I suppose. So I think maybe that helps as well, because if you come up with something else, if say like you've got a gambling addict in the room and I talk about my experiences and how I think that relates, people might think, oh, yeah, actually, I get that. The same as the abusive relationship thing. Regardless of how many people are in the audience, there will be somebody in there who has experienced either an abusive relationship or a controlling relationship or whatever. So I think, again, it's a way of getting people to think about things differently, using personal experiences and using experiences that they can relate to. And I think that's quite different to just standing up with a load of pie charts. Bloody pie charts.
I hate the word pie chart. It's so deceptive, right? Because pies are wonderful things.
Yeah.
Like the charts that they have produced are not.
Yeah, I quite agree. I did a book proposal once a couple of years ago, which didn't get picked up. But I was so proud of this particular image, right? And I'm going to say it, and I want credit if anybody decides to use this. I was talking about the surface web, the next bit of web, I can't remember what that is, and then the dark web. And I did it with it as a screenshot of a piece of Toblerone, and like where the sort of big crunchy bit is, that's the dark web, and then you kind of got this smaller bit. I would look at that if it was up on a screen. I'd much rather look at a massive piece of Toblerone than any other sort of pie chart. Wouldn't you?
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, I think it really strikes me as being a lot of, back to your ways of communicating this stuff. It strikes me that nowadays we have the wherewithal, and I'm thinking about things like Canva, but also video. We have the wherewithal. Individuals can be far more creative, produce amazing infographics, and there's lots of things that we can now do that we wouldn't have been able to do before. So I think the era of boring communications, there's no excuse for it. Just because your topic is boring, make it more interesting. Find a way, because your competition for people's attention isn't the next most boring thing. It's you're up against Netflix, whatever you want to pick, something, social media, stuff that's grabbing people's attention, because that's the benchmark now. And so I think if we want to get through to people, particularly in younger generations, we need to find ways that resonate with them that are much more human. And I think so. The Toblerone thing is a brilliant example of, okay, it's not shifting that far from the traditional format, but it's a clever tweak on it, right? It's something that's a little bit different and quirky and memorable and will land. And my sympathy for boring presentation, I'm out, I'm done with it, right? We should know better, particularly with the pandemic, right? Where we all knew what it was like to be sitting bored at home. Right? Some people took that as an opportunity to do crazy things and write a book about it.
That's winding up people on the internet, yeah. I also have an amazing time with internet perverts who send me pictures they shouldn't. That's one of my hobbies as well.
Are you particularly vulnerable to this stuff?
Well, if you are a woman on Twitter, people see you as fair game. So
it's sort of like a particularly debauched nightclub, is and that's being polite and unfair on nightclubs, but
no, it's way worse. It's way worse. It's like the worst of humanity has just been dropped into a pit, and said, "Here you are. This is your life now." And there are some of us who are still on it, on like X, Twitter, whatever, who are in this pit amongst the kind of scrabbling mobs, thinking, I don't really know what to do here. I don't know. It's yeah, if you are a woman, I mean, I'm 47. I'm no model. I don't have a particularly interesting anything really. And yet the amount of soldiers, oil rig workers, fake celebrities. I tell you, one of the things is though, and I do allude to this in the book. Well, I don't allude to it, I say it. Once my own incompetence in speaking has left me lots of words. Once you engage with a scammer, even if it's to tell them to bugger off, your name is put onto what they call a suckers list, which means that the more you engage with them, the more you will hear from more of them. And I've obviously now got a reputation for talking to scammers, and they don't care what you say. They just think, oh, right, she speaks, fair game. So I'm obviously now in the midst of kind of various conversations with celebrities. Oh, and the latest thing is you will get people pretending to be celebrities' managers or agents saying, please watch out for fake celebrities. Have you sent any money? And they will then tell you that they can get it back for you for a fee. So they're evolving. They're evolving. I think if you're a woman on the internet, people see you as fair game.
One of the things that really struck me in the book was you've had a few people that respond to you knowing that you've put previous conversations up.
Yes.
So you had the sort of, you're not going to share this conversation in public, are you?
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really odd, I don't know, it's a psychologically very strange thing, because surely is that just, it's like anything to keep the conversation going, I guess.
I think they want you to know that they've looked at your profile. And I think they are genuinely concerned about then their account getting shut down. Because it's a little bit like the being kept isolated. They want you to keep that conversation to them, between you and them, because then people aren't going to say to you, this is a fake. So I think it's a very weak attempt getting you to just speak between the two of you. But it's, I've been studying romance fraud now for, 5-6 years. And I still can't get my head around some of the things they do. And now I'm having a conversation with a romance fraudster, and I'll suddenly realize that it's a bot, because what they're coming out with is a very, it's got, and I love this. Sometimes they leave parts of the script on when they respond to you. So it will say step 3, tell her you love her. And then it will say, I love you. So they've copied and pasted, but just really badly. And I sort of think, if you're going to do this, put the effort in.
Be professional.
Exactly. Stop giving me substandard material, because I'm not interested. I'm not interested in your laziness.
Just
makes me livid.
So conscious of time. So what's now? I mean, this is an ongoing thing for you, right? My sense is you'll be the last person getting off Twitter, right? Because it's a fertile space.
Do you know the thing is, I actually don't enjoy Twitter anymore, because it's become so nasty, and so many wonderful people have left it. Since Elon Musk took over.
Yeah.
I mean, God, it really is. It's just a terrible free-for-all with people saying, because he obviously said, right, I want this to be a platform of free speech. So, okay, there's some merit in that. But let's have a limit on what people can actually say, because some of the stuff is so horrific.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. So, but I can't leave, because this is what I do. So it's, I just realised I'm in another abusive relationship.
Well,
I'm in an abusive relationship with Twitter.
Well, I was going to sort of point towards that and just go, looking at this as an observer, but you're also playing in that dynamic. And I did wonder, this must have an impact on you on some level, right? Because you're not just an observer, right? You're not just going there and chronicling this stuff. You have to in order to do some of the things you do, you're participating in it on some level. And I wondered have you got any sense of what that's doing to you? Because it's interesting, right?
Yeah. Now, I do sometimes take breaks and I post a lot less than I used to. And interestingly, I've got this one particular pervert, right, who is constantly on me on Instagram, and I call him long-term sex pest Greg. Now, I've been winding him up for years. He calls himself Coke Can Greg, for reasons which are obvious and also false, because he sent me so many pictures of it. I can say that the Coke can similarity is not true. But he continues to do it. Now, I found this funny initially, and I blocked him in the end for about 6 months, because even though it was making people laugh and what I was I always blocked out images so that people didn't, but that started to really get to me, even more than the fraud stuff, which I suppose I always thought of myself as a bit more kind of Teflon.
Resilient, right?
But actually, the interactions with him in particular, they have affected me. And I might just knock that on the head altogether, because it has given me, I don't know, I suppose maybe some unfair thoughts about men. And I've got a wonderful partner. But when you get these people saying things and doing things and sending you pictures and videos, and there are a lot of them, you can't help but take stuff on board.
Right.
And sort of sometimes you kind of look around you and think, is there anyone in this room that would do that?
And you can't definitively answer that with no, right?
No, of course not. No. Because these are, I spoke to this one girl once who had been for an interview, and she'd been interviewed by the director of sales for this very big company. And he had pictures of his family on his desk, certificates of all sorts all over the walls, very, very, well-spoken, articulate, knowledgeable. When she left the interview, he sent her dick pics and said, you can have the job if ... So you never know. And this is the thing, having spoken to so many victims of, this cyber flashing that they call it now, you do get affected. You do. No matter how much you don't want to and how much you want to believe in how good most people are, there is something in your head that has that in the background.
But I sort of think, in a way, that's probably the way it has to be, because that's why this thing is an issue. That's why we need that. It would be weird. I'll put it another way. It'd be weird if it wasn't affecting you. If you were just immune,
right.
if you're immune to it, because then you'd be normalizing the thing. So unfortunately, I guess the byproduct of what you're doing is that it does get to you. And I think that's interesting. I wouldn't want to have a conversation with you where you went, well, that's just boys being, the usual excuses that are used to justify this stuff. I wouldn't want to be hearing them from you. So to a certain extent, I sort of unfortunately have to not wish it on you. That's the wrong word, but sort of, that seems to me to be a key dynamic in this thing, for you to retain some degree of normality and sanity around what you're doing.
Do you know what's strange though? When I have this conversation with younger people, so friends' daughters and stuff, they all say, oh yeah, we had these pictures, but that's just what boys do. And that is depressing, because they are, young women, teenage girls, growing up thinking
that's okay.
That's what boys
right,
do. Yeah. Now, my generation, like I said, I didn't grow up with the internet. So it's, as far as I'm concerned, that's not what boys do.
Right.
It's what some grown men do. But you speak to people in schools, teachers and whatever, and it is what some teenage boys do. And more often than not, they're not picked up on it, because girls just go, oh. So we're in a difficult situation with that. Yeah.
Wow. So tell us what I want to close.
Yes,
I want to close out on a high. So tell us what's happening at the moment. So we'll give people the titles of the books. All that will be on the show notes as well in a second. But what's your next project apart from the ongoing stuff that you're doing?
Well, I'm in a bit of a lull at the moment because I've got a couple of projects that I'm sort of waiting to hear back on. And if they don't come to anything, then I've got no idea what I might do. Just run around, run up and down the street shouting, maybe, just, to fill my time. But I've got another book proposal in with my agent, which you and I have spoken about separately. I would love dearly to write this book. So I'm really hoping that comes to something. I've got some presentations booked in throughout the year, not as many as I'd like, but obviously it's early January, so hopefully more will come in soon. And other than that, I'll be pacing around my flat.
I was about to say available for weddings and bar mitzvahs. I've realised that's entirely inappropriate.
Yeah, can you imagine? Yeah. Yeah. Somebody wanted me to do an alternative Valentine's Day presentation. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable about that, to be honest. Because I actually met my other half online while I was trying to find scammers online.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation that we should
I know.
Right. I have taken up far too much of your time. Thank you for being thank you for being a great force of nature and an inspiration in terms of being oneself and what playing and childishness can actually deliver in terms of it's a good values. I'm a definite advocate for that. Keep being you because I love it. It's infectious stuff. But before I let you go, tell people how they can find you, remind them what the fabulous book is called and anything else that you want to plug.
So I am on Twitter and the others. I mean, Instagram is just generally pictures of my dinner. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. Can't get my head around those. As Death to Spinach, just as it sounds. That's that. The first book, Keanu Reeves Is Not in Love with You, is Amazon, Waterstones, independent bookshops. And the second book, Future of Fraud, you can pre-order it now. And it comes out in April.
Amazing. Links to all of those things. I'm going to have to go and find all of your social accounts now. Links to all of those things in the show notes. Becky, thank you firstly for being you and just doing what you do. I think it's really, really important. And I think you bring a fresh voice to this really important discussion. But above all, thank you for being an absolutely fabulous guest on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself.
It's been a pleasure. I could continue all afternoon in my lull of employment. So, you'd better go before I don't stop.
Amazing. Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of the show. My enormous thanks to Becky for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Becky, her books, and some of the topics we talked about in the show, have a look in the show notes. You'll find links to those there. You'll also find a link to my previous episode with a victim of a romance fraud, Anna Rowe, which sits nicely alongside this one. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk podcast, where have you been? But thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review or rating for it on whichever platform you're listening to the show on, please do so. It really, really does help. You can follow the Human Risk podcast on LinkedIn, other social platforms coming soon. And to catch up with episodes that you might have missed, visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with some further episodes of the show. But in the meantime, stay safe. Remember, we can all fall for this stuff, particularly in a world of AI deepfakes. So be careful out there. But above all, thank you so much for listening.